The cabin door creaked open, and 6 children froze at the table, their spoons mid-air. A stranger stood in the doorway, an exhausted widow clutching a threadbare shawl, eyes hiding years of sorrow. They had expected a cook. Instead, she looked like someone who carried secrets heavier than hunger. Could this fragile woman really feed 6 children and a grieving father? Or was she destined to break under the weight of their lives? The wind rolled over the plains, carrying dust that clung to every crevice of the wooden ranch house. It was the kind of place where silence lived, thick, dry, and endless. Inside, 6 children sat restlessly, bowls of cold beans half-eaten, their faces pale from weeks of simple meals and no mother's touch. At the head of the table sat John Callahan, a man in his late 30s with shoulders shaped by years of ranch work. His eyes, once bright, now carried a shadow carved by loss. 2 winters ago, his wife had died from fever, leaving him with children too young to fend for themselves. Since then, he worked sunup to sundown, fighting to keep cattle alive. But every night, the sound of coughing, crying, and hunger reminded him he couldn't do it alone. The neighbors whispered that John needed a woman in the house, not for marriage, but for survival. So word spread to the nearby town, and eventually to Clara Bennett, a widow barely 30, who had buried her own husband just months ago. She needed work. He needed help. That evening, Clara arrived in a faded blue dress, her shoes worn from the trail. She looked fragile but stood steady at the doorway, her gaze scanning 6 curious faces. John cleared his throat. "Children, this is Mrs. Bennett. She'll be cooking for us." The youngest girl tugged her brother's sleeve. "She looks kind," she whispered, but kindness alone couldn't feed them. And as Clara stepped inside, the ranch seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if this new beginning would heal or break them further. Clara lit the stove that first night with trembling hands. The children gathered close, watching as she stirred a pot of soup richer than anything they had tasted in months. The smell of onions, herbs, and fresh bread filled the cabin, and for the first time, silence was replaced with small, hopeful murmurs. Yet John sat apart, arms crossed, his jaw tight. He had seen women come and go, neighbors, hired girls, all leaving when the work became too heavy or the nights too lonely. Clara could be no different. He refused to trust the warmth in her eyes. Still, the children did. The next morning, Clara braided little Anna's hair before school, wiped dust from Daniel's boots, and slipped an extra biscuit into Samuel's pocket. Simple gestures that made them smile. But each kindness stirred something sharp in John, a reminder of what his late wife once did. 1 week later, Clara faced her first trial. The pantry was nearly empty, and a storm had washed out the road to town. With only a sack of flour and a handful of dried beans, she improvised, baking flatbread over the fire and stretching beans into stew. The children clapped at the taste. John said nothing. His silence stung her more than any insult. That night she overheard him mutter to a neighbor, "She won't last the winter." Clara's chest tightened. She knew pain well, but rejection inside these walls would cut deeper than any loss. Days grew harder. The youngest boy fell ill with fever, and Clara stayed by his side through the night, cooling his brow with wet cloths, whispering prayers until dawn. When John entered and saw her asleep in the chair, the boy's tiny hand still clutching hers, something in his expression shifted, but he said nothing. Then came the turning point. Midway through spring, cattle thieves struck the ranch. John rode out with his rifle, leaving Clara in charge. She gathered the children inside, barred the doors, and kept the fire burning. The youngest cried out, "Will Pa be shot?" Her voice quivered, but Clara answered steady, "Your father is strong, and until he returns, I will keep you safe." Hours dragged like years. Finally, John stumbled back, bloodied from a grazed shoulder, but alive. Clara helped him inside, tore strips of cloth, and bound the wound with careful hands. For the first time, he looked at her not as a stranger, but as someone carrying equal weight. Yet even trust comes slowly. The children, now clinging to Clara as if she'd always been theirs, began whispering, "She's like Ma." John overheard, and anger rose like fire. He slammed his fist on the table. "No one replaces your mother. Do you hear me?" His voice cracked, and the children fell silent. Clara's face paled, but she held his gaze. "I'm not trying to replace her," she whispered. "I'm just trying to keep them from breaking." The room went still, her words cutting deeper than any blade. John looked away, torn between grief and the quiet truth she carried. The darkest moment came weeks later. Clara received a letter from town. Her brother had offered her a place to stay, with steady work and no burden of children not her own. She folded the paper quietly, unsure if she could endure John's distance any longer. That night, while the children slept, she packed her shawl. But before dawn, little Anna woke and caught her at the door. "Don't leave us," the girl whispered, clutching Clara's dress. "We prayed for a mother, and then you came." Clara's heart broke. Tears filled her eyes as John stepped from the shadows, having overheard. His voice was low, trembling. "I thought I was protecting their mother's memory," he said, "but I've only kept them starved for love." For the first time, his pride crumbled, and in that silence, Clara realized her place was not chosen by need alone, but by the bond they had built through fire and sorrow. The following morning, Clara unpacked her shawl and lit the stove as if nothing had happened. But the air felt different, lighter, warmer, carrying a promise unspoken yet understood. John began sitting closer at supper, listening as the children laughed, watching Clara's hands as she served bread, her smile soft but steady. One evening, he stood and raised a quiet toast. "To the woman who gave my children back their laughter," he said, his voice thick, "and who gave me back my home." The children cheered, their voices filling the room with a joy that felt like sunlight after endless rain. Clara lowered her eyes, but a tear slipped free, not from sorrow but from a peace she thought she'd never know again. She had been hired to cook for 6 children and their father, but through hunger, storms, sickness, and silence, she had become more. Not a replacement, not a shadow. A mother they wished for, and a partner John never expected to find again. And as the prairie wind whispered outside, carrying the scent of spring grass, the Callahan Ranch finally felt alive. Not because loss was forgotten, but because love had dared to return. Sometimes the family we think we hire is the one we were meant to keep. Do you believe love can grow again where only grief lived before? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow our channel Western Stories for more powerful Wild West tales. Until next time, ride safe, dream deeply, and never stop believing in second chances.